Hello and welcome to Street Biashara. I'm your host Brenda Nyamichaba. Now, the Central Bank of Kenya monetary policy recently retained the lending rate at 9%, keeping it unchanged for the 7th consecutive time. While announcing this, the Central Bank of Kenya Governor Dr. Patrick Njoroge said this was informed by many factors, among which include the inflation rate standing at 5.7% in June. Now, as we take a closer look at this graph, we can clearly see the performance of inflation rates from the year 2013 up to the year 2019. Now, as a closer look at this, you can see the year 2017 inflation rates were at the highest, which basically means that the cost of goods and services were averagely very high. Now, we're going to go on the streets and get to find out what exactly you understand by the term inflation. Now, see you there. What does inflation mean?
Inflation.
Yeah.
Something, okay, let's say it's like something becoming bigger. Inflation.
Something becoming bigger pressure.
Yeah.
Could you give me an example of that something? What do you mean something?
Okay, like inflating a balloon.
You've heard of the term inflation, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
I guess value for money in a particular point in time.
The inflation means is the variation of the economy level. Maybe sometimes there's a lot of money in the market. Sometimes there's less money flowing in the market. So I think it's the difference between the amount of currency flowing at that particular time.
Or let's say it's the varying in the value.
In the value, okay.
In the value of currency.
Inflation, when people just inflate maybe prices, yeah.
Okay.
Prices for food, yes.
Inflation is increase of daily items which are daily used. The price increase on those.
Inflation ni vitu kupanda bei.
Kupanda bei.
Yes.
Okay. So give me an example ni inapanda bei.
Kama sai maziwa nakumbuka 3 years ago ilikuwa 29 bob, sasa imefika 70.
Inflation is just the general rise of prices compared to like your average salary, like that. Yeah.
Now, after getting the chance to go on the streets and get to hear your interesting answers about the term inflation, it's time for us to get a clear understanding from an expert. And the individual helping me with that today is CEO of Infallible Company, Bide Mwamba. Thank you so much for joining me on Street Biashara once again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we're just going to jump right into the term inflation, and you could just break down for us what exactly inflation is.
Inflation is the cost of goods and how that changes from one period to another period. If you walk into a supermarket today, maybe you were buying milk at 55 shillings last month. Now you're buying it at 60 shillings. Inflation is comparing what it was last month versus what it is now, and to see what has been happening to the price of this thing. It's very important because if your price of milk was from 55 to 60 and you only had 100 shillings, now you can no longer buy milk and something else.
Okay.
Because what it does, as the prices are going up, they reduce your purchasing power. So your income is not moving. I still have 100. Maybe before I was buying milk at 55 and bread at 45. But now if the bread remains at 45 and milk moves to 60, if I don't have an extra 5 shillings, I can only buy milk.
Yeah.
So really inflation is the cost of goods, and how does that move from one period to the next period.
Okay. And what factors point out to inflation in a country?
Okay, so there are a couple of things. When you come to the element of economics, there's a supply side and there's also demand side factors that pull into the cost of goods and how that changes. That is inflation. When you talk about supply side, it's the cost of actually bringing these goods to you. So let's stick to the example of bread and milk. So if you're looking at bread, there's the cost of wheat that the manufacturer has to buy. There's a cost of electricity. There's also the cost of fuel, because he has to transport the bread from his base, his manufacturing, his factory rather, to the supermarket. And that cost, then he has to put it to labor and the actual bread. So he has to load it onto that by the time it comes to where you're going to buy it from. Now what happens is, if there's any change in the cost of fuel, or if there's any change in the cost of electricity, he has to pass that cost over to you. So that's what we call supply side factors. Okay. So you end up finding, like currently in Nairobi, or rather in Kenya, fuel prices have been going up. So the last element of inflation that we saw, which was the end of July, it was up to 6.27%. And what is happening is the government increased the cost of fuel. You increase the cost of fuel, everything goes up. Because there's also a drought, it means that water supply is not necessarily adequate. The cost of electricity goes up, so that pushes up inflation. That's one way of looking at it. When it comes to demand side, what you're saying is too many people have a lot of money and they're chasing for the same goods. And you always have to remember the price of any good reflects what is the demand and what is the cost of that supply. So if you go again to the bread example, if the seller of that bread had 10 units, but then all of a sudden he has 20 people who are chasing for the same bread, it's in his best interest to maximize that. So he'll say, I'll sell it to the highest bidder. So then the price will go up from maybe 45 to 60, but it won't be because of the cost of producing that bread. It will be because so many people have so much money that they're willing to pay up to 60 shillings or even more to make sure they get the bread. So that's demand side. Demand side is when the economy is doing well, people have extra money and they're not really concerned about price. Supply side means that there are constraints and there are shocks to the economy. The cost of production overall is increasing, and therefore that cost has to be passed on to the consumer.
Okay, wonderful. Now, how does inflation affect the MPC's decision on lending rates?
Okay, so MPC, that's the Monetary Policy Committee. It's the key committee, and most of the decisions that are made in this committee, and it is a committee of the Central Bank of Kenya. Now, the Central Bank of Kenya, as the banker of the executive of the government of Kenya, its main responsibility is price stability. By price stability is to ensure that inflation is not over or below a certain element, a certain benchmark, or rather framework that they have put for themselves. And the guidance on this is 5% plus or minus 2.5 percentage points. What that means is, as long as inflation is between 2.5% to 7.5%, then the central bank is okay. It's not worried. If it goes over and above this, it means there's a lot of pressure in the economy. Goods are becoming expensive. It's becoming more expensive to do business. It's not a good sign. If it goes below 2.5%, it means that there's actually no production activity going on in the economy and people cannot consume. It's also not a good sign. So that's what they typically look at. Now, when you want to see what the MPC decides on when it's making its decision, it will look at very many parameters. We've heard of maybe over 262 variables in terms of data points that they analyze each and every single time when they have that MPC meeting. They'll be looking at the cost of vegetables in Nairobi, vis-a-vis the cost of the same vegetables in Turkana, the same vegetables in Nyeri, in different key counties in the economy. They tend to focus on Kisumu, Nairobi, and Mombasa, among others, because they're the key areas where a lot of commercial activity happens. So they tend to look at what is the price of these goods and what is driving the price. Is it higher transport costs, or is it that people are demanding for more? But one thing that they're always looking out for as well is oil. What's the price of oil? Because we do not produce our own oil. We buy all our oil. And if there's any movements globally, then we actually have to amend our oil prices. And I remember when we were talking about the production of wheat, of bread. If it has to be transported and the cost goes up, then it has an impact. But in a nutshell, what the MPC looks at, what is happening in the economy. And it also pays attention to what's happening with fuel prices and what's happening with electricity prices. It will not make an adjustment because of this too. And let me add a third one. Also because of rain and agricultural products, because rain is seasonal. So they will pay attention, but that will not impact. What will impact an MPC decision is the cost of money, cost of credit in the economy. What is happening? Is the inflation coming from the demand side? If it's coming from the demand side, remember, people have too much money. They want to reduce the amount of money in the economy, then they will increase the MPC rate. If it's the reverse, then they'll want to reduce the MPC rate so that people can have access to money and be able to spend. Okay.
And how exactly does an economy mitigate high inflation rates?
Well, that's through the MPC. So remember the mandate of the MPC via the Central Bank of Kenya is price stability. When you think central bank, the first and foremost objective of the central bank is price stability. Price stability is equals to inflation. So anytime they're always, you're coming closer to 2.5% or 7.5%, and that's the guide, that's the benchmark, rather the range that the central bank has set for itself, then it will not do anything much. You won't see an upside, an increase or a reduction in the MPC rate. But if something happens, for instance, to trigger inflation going over 7.5%, for instance, there's no rain, because the rain has been insufficient, then all of a sudden the price of of a bag of unga moves from 100 to 200, then they will be forced to either find out, is it that there are too many people demanding for that unga, or is it becoming so expensive for that unga, and what can we do to manage the money supply in the economy? That's when they would make that. But I think for us today, where we are standing at, inflation numbers look pretty much okay. I think for you as a consumer is to know that the MPC will not make a decision because of the impact of oil, but then the impact of oil is going to have an impact on your pocket because that has to be passed on to you. So it's more of supply side led inflation. It'll have a negative impact on you. You really cannot buy bread and store it in advance, unfortunately. So we will expect an uptick on prices, but then the MPC will not correct it because it's transitionary. It's temporary, it's expected, it's nothing new. So we do not expect anything to happen. And maybe the final thing to also add, what has happened because of the rate cap, which is a new regulation that was passed, not new, old regulation that was passed in 2016, putting a ceiling on how much credit should be extended out in Kenya, which is 4 percentage points above the MPC rate. Now, what that has happened is the central bank doesn't have clear visibility of money supply because the banks are saying we are not going to lend. So they don't have a sense of, is there money circulating in the economy? Is there no money circulating in the economy? What's the cost of this money? So in a way, people and the experts keep saying because of the rate cap, the decisions and the objectivity of the MPC is actually muted. So it's actually becoming less and less a good parameter or barometer to look at and see what is happening in the economy. So maybe that's also an interesting way to look at it.
Thank you so much for that, Bibe. I really appreciate that. As you can clearly see, that is the actual definition of inflation. And when I do come on the streets to ask you the same exact question, I do hope you'll know the right answer this time around. As for now, see you next time on the next episode of Street Biashara.